Well, good morning, everyone. I hope that some of you, if you had a chance to do the actual emergency fund calculation, you're still breathing and you're still A-okay, and no one had to think, oh, wow, this is a forever project. I think it is interesting to do that calculation, and I think it's also another sort of, hey, self-reflection of, wow, maybe there are some places that I could cut my expenses because that's a lot of money to save up in 3 months. I also wanted to just not beat the dead horse, but I really do want you to be checking out any of the get-rich-quick schemes that you might see around campus or that you might hear about, because it is so easy for students to get connected to those, and it's a downward spiral. So please keep sort of tuned in and share with your colleagues if you hear something insane. Sadly, I've missed that opportunity to make $10,000 every 2 weeks because the signs are gone in my neighborhood. So apparently they got enough people for that. So darn it, here I am, just doing my thing. So let's start talking about credit cards, and let's find out if we know some trivia. So does anyone know what year the first card that could be used in multiple locations was offered? So we're not talking about a Sears card or a gas card. We're talking about a card that you could actually use in multiple locations. Anyone want to take a guess at what year that was? 1965, 1980s. Thank you for those guesses. Actually, it was 1950. So Frank McNamara, who was the head of the Hamilton Credit Corporation, founded the Diners Club card. So that was the first card that could be used in multiple locations. Sort of the anecdotal legend behind this is that Frank had an epiphany of starting a credit card company after a business meal at what was then a very famous restaurant in New York City called the Major's Captain Grill. Before going to the restaurant, he changed his suit and left his wallet in his other suit. Well, that's what he says. When he realized that he'd forgotten the wallet, he thought, wow, how useful it would be to have a card you could use instead of cash. Well, of course, I'm thinking the card would still be in his wallet, but I don't want to ruin the story. So let's just pretend we don't know that. So what he decided to do was create the Diners Club, and it became an instant hit. Now, interestingly enough, it could only be used in 28 restaurants and 2 hotels, but it became a status symbol for the New York's business elite, and it grew to 10,000 customers in a year. So that's the beginning of the credit card plastic space. Here's not a really good piece of trivia, but what do you think in 2020, what percentage of households depended on their credit cards for basic living expenses? I don't mean travel. I mean actually using it for mortgages or utilities or bills. Anybody want to take a guess about the percentage of people using credit for that? Thank heavens, Angel, it isn't 65% or 80%. It's actually less than you might think, although 30%? I'm not sure that it's 37%. So we're talking about really using that for mortgage, for rent, for utilities, insurance, and groceries. So that's a little bit of a difficulty for individuals. Now, here's a really good factoid that you can, it's like magic. You can use it at your barbecues coming up in this weekend. So how can you tell which industry issued the credit card? You know, sometimes you put in your first couple numbers and you're surprised when it suddenly goes, oh, you have a MasterCard, or oh, you have a Discover card. You're thinking, ooh, gosh, how did you hack into that system? Well, the reality is that it's the first 2 digits on your credit card in identification number identify the type of industry that issued the card. So if your card number starts with a 1 or 2, it's an airline. Number 3 is for companies in the travel and entertainment industry. So for instance, all American Express and Diners Club cards starts with a 3. Your numbers 4 and 5 are for banking institutions. So for instance, if you have a 4, then it's a Visa card. And if you have a 5, you have a MasterCard. Number 6 is used for merchandising and banking. 7 is for gas cards. 8 is for telecommunication companies, and 9 is used for national assignments. So you can do some magic tricks with that. Last trivia before we get into the deep, dark secrets of credit. How many credit transactions occur around the world every second? This might be lower than you're thinking. It's actually 10,000. Yeah, Tina, I would say millions as well, but it's 10,000 every second. The reality is that 15,000 can be settled per minute. So I think that's how we get into those millions and billions, but just in a second, it is 10,000. So appreciate you using the chat box. Remember, feel free to just blurt out. Want to continue to remind you that there are 2 purposes for these workshops. One is for your information, and one is for you to be able to have a solid, curious conversation with your students, family, and friends. So we started out talking about the psychology of money. We got into behavioral economics. And as you can see, that's going to be a common thread for all of our workshops is really, what's your money history? What's your money mindset? We moved on to spending and financial planning. Yesterday, we talked about savings and investing. And today we're talking about managing credit and debt. So once again, I'm going to encourage you to do a little bit of self-check, do a little bit of your own questioning is, how do you feel about credit? Do you think it's a valuable tool? Maybe you're neutral on the subject. Maybe you believe credit can really get you in trouble. And again, this is a topic that for many of my colleagues in the world of personal financial wellness and those on the peripheral sidelines have said repeatedly, oh, let's not talk about it, CJ. You know, if we don't talk about it, no one will use it. And I remind you that we have that same sort of feeling about sex ed. And the reality is that it doesn't stop anybody if we don't talk about it. So people will use credit. And what we want to do is we want to, just as someone just mentioned in the chat box, we want to give people the tools to manage their credit successfully. So that's where I'm coming from, is the fact that I'm not encouraging people to rack up wild credit card debt, but I am encouraging you to have a conversation with your students for a variety of reasons around credit. So let's just find out from ourselves. I've got a great handout. So Melody's going to pop it into the chat box, but the question is, are you credit ready? And I'm going to go ahead and show it on my screen as well. This is a great conversation starter with your students. So there are a number of questions. It says the way you handle money may be a strong indicator of how you will use credit. So take this quiz and see what you're thinking about. I'm going to go ahead and move this up. So if you're using my screen, you won't be able to see everything in a nice, handy way. Right now, we'll only be able to answer questions 1 and 5, but it's a multiple guess, so it should be easy peasy. And I'll go ahead and squinch it up in just a few, but just don't overanalyze. Just do a quick answer, and then we'll find out how credit ready you are. Give you a few minutes on question 1 and 5, if you're using my screen. All right, let's pull together. So was there an opportunity for some of you to say, oh, wow, I maybe need to do a little bit more thinking about how I use credit? Again, it's a great conversation starter. I've used this with students of all ages because it doesn't talk about credit. It really talks about your view of money. So, you know, when you sit down and really talk about the fact that, how do people feel when you borrow money from a friend? Well, some of us think, you know, no hurry. I'm willing to repay, but till you ask, I'm not going to. Well, that's an interesting concept. or possibly when you get $65 a month raise at your job, what would you do with it? Some questions around that. So I hope you enjoyed that. I want you to, again, feel free to use those handouts with your students, family, and friends. Well, let's talk about our objectives today. What do we have in store for us on this topic? So our learning objectives today are to explore the advantages and disadvantages of credit, to understand the 5 C's of credit worthiness, discover what impacts a person's credit score. We absolutely want to recognize good and bad debt, consider the consequences of excessive debt, and then most importantly, be able to list some strategies to manage credit and reduce debt. We're going to start off today with looking at the pros and cons of credit. We are going to take a credit IQ. We're going to look at the myths about credit, the 5 C's of credit, find out what's in a score, as I mentioned earlier, good versus bad debt, and managing debt. So my hope is that you'll play along, and we've just done Are You Credit Ready? And now the question is, how do you really feel about credit? What kinds of things do you think about when you hear that word? So if you would join me at www.menti.com, you can do this on your phone or computer. And when you get there, use the code, and Melody, if you'll pop this in the chat box, the code is 6241-5469. So again, we're going to www.menti.com. Our code is 6241-5469. I'm going to pull that up on the screen, and we'll see what people are thinking about. So what words or feelings do you associate with the term credit? And remember, the more that we see duplicate answers, we get those words get bigger. So debt is right there in the middle. Shopping. We'll leave it open for just another minute to let you add your comments, if you would. All right, thank you for that. We're going to continue. I appreciate those of you who were able to play with us today. So one of the things we really want to be able to do is provide information. Remember, that's our role here. No judgment, just information. So let's talk about the fact that certainly credit is not free money, but what are the advantages to having a credit card? Well, absolutely safer than cash. And walking around with a wad of cash is an invitation to be robbed, and it's inconvenient to boot. So if you're planning a major purchase, then obviously what you want to do is have the cash on hand, but use your plastic. In addition, if the item you buy doesn't work, you have immediate recourse to contact your credit card company, stop payment, and go through a dispute situation. If you've paid cash, your word against them, and usually you don't win that often. Obviously useful in emergencies. Credit allows you to purchase something today that you may not have the money for, but you may have the money by the time the credit card statement comes. But again, we spoke yesterday about what is an emergency. Oftentimes to a college student, that looks very clearly like getting a pizza during the study hour. And while it could be an emergency in some way, it's not really what we're talking about. And here's the dilemma. Many parents, well-meaning and well-intentioned, provide their students before they go off to college with a credit card of sorts for emergencies. And sometimes that emergency happens to be spring break, because as the student, your parents aren't about to let you go to Belize on spring break, but everybody else is. So that sounds like an emergency to me. And once I break the seal on that credit card, wow, then fair game. Everything becomes an emergency. Clearly convenient for buying online and by phone. There are other means of doing that with PayPal and some other opportunities. But yes, we find that it's almost a necessary evil to have a credit card. Most importantly, and something that we rarely talk about when we talk about credit, is the fact that your credit history is really what enables you to make those large purchases. So when you think to yourself, I'm going to it's cash always. just going cash, cash, cash. Okay. But then you're an unknown quantity to any lender when you go in and you want to make a big purchase. And what happens to you? Well, oftentimes you're simply denied, or you get the highest interest rate possible. So when we can share with students how to be a responsible user of credit, we're really helping them build a credit history. I mentioned, I believe, when we first met, that I was fortunate enough to work for the only bank in the world for people 21 and under, created by a wonderful philanthropist by the name of Bill Daniels, who has since died. But he wanted students, young people, to understand what it was to be in a transactional relationship with creditors and bankers and so forth and so on. So we did offer early on, this was actually before I was involved with the bank, credit cards to 12-year-olds. I know, oh my gosh, some of you are clutching your heart thinking, how irresponsible. But here was the deal. $100 limit. Now, that's a lot of money for a 12-year-old. But the fact of the matter is, we wanted to make convenient users versus revolver users. So a convenience user of credit uses the credit and has the money in the bank to pay off the balance every month. A revolver user of credit keeps revolving that credit. They pay a little bit of that, and there's still some left the next month. They add to it. It's like the revolving door. That's not necessarily responsible use of credit. So yes, I will continue to be proud that we made that choice to provide young people the opportunity to experience credit. Well, let's talk about the disadvantages, because there are. And the first thing is that you spend more than if you use cash. I mean, think about it. Remember that $20 bill you had in your back pocket or in your wallet or in your purse? And you just weren't willing to break it. But then all of a sudden, maybe you picked up a bottled water or candy bar or whatever. And then all of a sudden, that $20 is gone. You can't remember where you spent it. But when you go to McDonald's to pick up a burger or Burger King, no cash in your wallet. Well, that stops you right there. You don't go anywhere. No cash, no food. Well, actually, some of you may remember that for a while there, back when, no fast food establishment would take credit or debit cards. It was cash only. And then one day McDonald's started to think about it, and they thought, what would happen if we allowed people to charge a hamburger? Well, they piloted it. Here's what happened. So Lisa and Melody and I are in the car, and I'm driving, and we want to grab something to eat. And I say, hey, Lisa, what do you want? And Lisa said, oh, yeah, I've only got a couple bucks of cash, so I'm good. I'm nothing. Are you sure? Okay. I say, hey, Melody, what do you want? She said, well, I've got a dollar, so let me do that, that dollar value menu. And then I say, oh, listen, I've got a credit card. What do you guys want? Well, then Lisa wants the full meal, biggie size, and add in an apple pie. And Melody's thinking, forget the dollar value menu. Let me go for the big stuff. And because it's just a piece of plastic being handed over. Well, that's exactly what McDonald's found out. More sales, bigger sales with credit cards. So yeah, we do spend more. And then you may pay extra for borrowed money. So if the items that you purchased all of a sudden cost more if you can't pay the balance off each month. So remember that pizza emergency? Well, if I'm like most students, by the time I pay that pizza off, I could have had steak and lobster, but I didn't know that. And most importantly, when you have an irresponsible use of your credit card, well, then debt hinders you from saving and investing. And we talked about that yesterday. What if I don't have any disposable income to put anywhere? Well, I might if I was using my credit responsibly. So, having debts and paying them off over months or years really does create a major obstacle to saving and investing money. Instead of saving money, I'm forced to actually many times keep paying for the items that I purchased in the past. And then I get a poor credit history. And that doesn't help out when I want to make those big purchases. So credit is a mixed bag. And what I want your students to recognize is that they're in control. So there's some really good advantages to using credit if you use it wisely. And then there's not so great if you're not using it well. Well, let's figure out what our credit IQ is now. So Melody, if you'll pop that into the box, it's a quick credit IQ. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with the credit IQ as well, so that you can use it on my screen. Let me pop to that place. So this is an easy peasy. It's strictly true or false, and there are just 12 statements. So again, no overanalyzing, just your quick reaction to these 12 statements, true or false. And then we will take a moment to see just exactly how well our credit IQ is. All right, hopefully everybody got a chance to do that quickly, just a quick true and false. Again, this is a great worksheet to use with your students, family, and friends. Exactly how is everybody's credit IQ? Well, let's take a look. Let's see how we did. So the question was, placing utilities in your name is a great way to build credit. The answer is false. Now, I do have an update for this because most utility companies do not report your payment information to the credit agencies. You may have you yourself checked out Experian for a credit report, and you may have seen on the news, Experian is really pushing this called the Experian Boost. They claim that if you add your phone bill, your cell phone bill, and your utility bills, you can add them to your Experian credit report. And then once they're in your report, your on-time payments may improve your credit history and increase your credit scores. The operative word here is, well, two operative words, on-time payments and may. So if you have students who are not timely with their utility payments, this is not a good idea. It will not boost their credit. And the question is may. So you may have seen the advertisements. I just saw a series of them over the weekend, but they were saying things like, oh, I added my credit. I boosted my credit score. I added my utility bill to my Experian report and my credit went up 16 points. Well, 16 points is good. So that's okay. But this isn't like it's going to ratchet up 120 points or so. So again, most utility companies do not share this information with their credit reporting agencies, but just to keep in mind. Number two, missing one payment will not impact your credit score. Oh, sad. This is false. One late payment may be indicated on your credit report, and this is the fastest way for your credit score to plummet. So it's about timely payments. One of the things that many individuals don't realize, because we sort of just go with the flow, is that you are in control. You can call up your credit card company and say, you know, I can't make this payment on the 5th of the month. Could we change my payment date to the 15th? They're not going to do that if you don't ask, because it's just an algorithm. The day you got your credit card was the day that they all decided that everybody got a credit card that day. Their payment was on the 5th. So you can change that payment date, but you need to call and request that. But that late payment is a killer. Number three, using your debit card wisely will help you establish good credit. Well, probably most of you said, no, that's crazy. That's what? But your students and many people get mistaken and confused because what's on your debit card, there is a logo of either a Visa or a MasterCard. And remember, you're at the point of sale and the little machine says, would you like this to be credit or debit? And you're thinking, wow, I think I'll do credit because I don't have any money in my account. No. It doesn't work that way. By pushing credit, the only thing that you're doing is that you're avoiding having to put in your PIN number. It comes directly out of your account. It does not get charged. But that's confusing, and it seems like a trick. Well, it sort of is. So your debit card withdraws money from your checking account and does not impact your credit, even though you've got that logo and even though you hit credit. At the gas station, at the gas pump, or at the grocery store, all you did was skip a step of putting in your code. So this is a confusing situation for a lot of people, but it debits a card, comes directly from your checking account. All credit cards are created equal? No, no, no. The fine print, and I purposely used a graphic with this, looking glass thing, because the fine print is almost microscopic. So you really need to be reading the fine print as to your students. When there was a big deluge of all of us getting credit card applications unsolicited before the Credit Card Act came to be, then things would say on the envelope, transfer your balance, 0 APR. And you're thinking, oh, thank God, I can get out from under this. Well, it was only on your balance if it stayed there, and it was only for the first 3 months maybe. And then anything you bought instead was like at 28%. So reading those fine printed words is really important. Number 5, a credit card comes with a credit limit. Well, yes, indeed. They do. Now, you may be aware that American Express, when they first started, they had no limit. But here's what you had to do. You had to pay your balance off every month. So if you had enough money to buy a yacht, you could absolutely do that with an American Express card. But they paid everyone who had an American Express card, and that's one of the reasons it was considered so prestigious, is no limit. You could rack up all sorts of credit, but you had to pay it off each month. Now, that was an interesting proposition because there's no money to be made for that company, except from a membership standpoint, there's no margin of error for them. So then as MasterCard and Visa came on, American Express said, whoa, wait a minute, you limit people and then you let them carry their balance over? Huh, that's interesting. Oh, that's where you make your money. Oh, yes, it is. So now you understand that American Express has different colored cards, and some of those cards come with a balance limit, so a credit limit, and that's where they're making their money because they finally got in on the game. So the limits are determined largely by your FICO score, which we will talk about in detail. Let's continue. You may pay the full amount anytime. Absolutely. There are some people who are under the impression that for some reason they think, oh no, I'm going to be penalized if I pay the full amount off. Oh no, please pay the full amount off each month if you can, because if you don't, then you incur the fees. So when I was doing workshops in person in high schools, I had a colleague and the two of us would stand up and I would say, this is my friend Rich, and Rich pays his credit card off every month. He uses it for everything that he does. He uses it to buy groceries, to gas. He uses it to budget. I sometimes don't pay my credit card off every month. And then we would say, which of us does the credit card company love most? Well, to a person, they would say, well, Rich. And we'd say, oh, no. Do you know what they call Rich in the credit card lingo? He's a deadbeat. They would go, oh, we'd say, yeah, they don't want people to pay off. They love me because I don't always pay off my balance. So that's also a thing to share with students because they're shocked that the credit card company doesn't love people who pay off their credit cards balances. Well, they don't, because there's no money to be made. But if you don't pay it off every month, then you yourself incur fees and then you're paying more. Number 7, there are only 2 credit reporting agencies. That would be false. There are 3, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. We'll talk more about what their role is in your credit history in just a moment. Question number 8 was FICO stands for Federal Insurance Corporation. It does not. It stands for Fair Isaac Corporation, which is a privately held company, which got the market on an algorithm that determines your credit score. So we'll talk more about FICO. We'll also talk about Karma Credit Karma, but understand that FICO is the most widely and more generally accepted credit score by financial institutions. And that's something to keep in mind. And we'll talk again about what your students need to know. People spend more money when they use credit. Well, that is true. We just talked about McDonald's. And so because it's just handing over a piece of plastic and not rummaging around in your couch for coin, then we do tend to spend a little bit more with credit. Number 10, everyone is entitled to as much credit as they want. Students love this question and they usually go, yes, absolutely. And the answer is false. Credit is based on your ability to repay. And then you usually get some grumbling students that say, well, it seems like you have to have money to have credit. And the answer is, yeah, you do. Number 11, in some states, your car insurance rate is tied to your FICO score. Well, you all in California do not have that situation, but I do in Colorado. So indeed, there has been a correlation between your credit score and your driving record. So in many states, insurance companies consider a low FICO score to be indicative of poor driving. California is one of 5 states who prohibit the use of credit-based premiums. So consider yourselves lucky, because that is not true in the state of Colorado. The last one, having no credit history is the way to go. Well, we know that answer to be false, because we need a credit history before we can make any kind of major purchase. Can't buy a car or a house without that credit history, because the question is, who are you, says the bank. Are you able to repay? Because it doesn't look like you've been around for very long. So before we move on to myths, let me make sure, were there any questions or concerns about the answers to those questions? Well, then let's do some myth busting. And these myths are alive and well in many people's minds. So the first myth is, I'll pay it off when I get a job, a raise, or whatever. Now, again, you can be a fan of Dr. Phil or not. That's not my concern. What my concern is that if it's possible, Google or YouTube or something. This has probably been, I'm thinking 5, maybe 8 years ago. Dr. Phil's son said, Dad, you have got to get a handle on this epidemic that is happening on college campuses. You've got to take a look at this credit card debt. Now, please listen carefully, because his son wasn't talking about debt overall. He was talking about credit card debt. So not student loan debt. Well, it's quite a remarkable series that Dr. Phil did on this, because a couple things I want you to be clued into. First of all, what they found on college campuses when they took their film crew out and about, they went to universities. They went to private universities, state universities. They went to community colleges. They went to tech schools. They covered everything they could think of that sort of qualified as post-secondary education. What they found was quite alarming. What they found was credit card debt among students on average of $30,000. Now, this is after the Credit Card Act went into effect, which was put into effect in 2010, was signed off on 2009. But back before 2009, some of you may remember that at college orientation, credit card companies wanted to be there, have a table, and they were handing out duffel bags and pizza for a year and chance of a lifetime trip, blah, 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 as long as you would sign up for a credit card. And that was when you were 18. The Credit Card Act said, no, we're going to stop that. until you're 21, unless you have someone who is signing for you, you cannot be solicited for a credit card. So this is after all of that, $30,000 in debt. Now, here was the question posed by Dr. Phil to those students who were interviewed. So are you concerned about having that debt when you leave college? Listen carefully to the answer. To a person, this was the answer. Oh, no, I'm not the least bit concerned because I'm going to make 6 figures when I graduate. That was the first problem. The second problem was, and when I get that money, I'll just pay off the whole $30,000 at once. So step back for a moment and realize that, first of all, very few college graduates walk into a 6-figure job, but more importantly, no one hands you that 110 grand in big bags. So then you can parcel out and find $30,000 of it and walk to the credit card company. As you all know, it comes in dibs and drabs, and the government takes their share of it. So it's hard to accumulate $30,000, even when you make a 6-figure salary. So that was an alarming fact. The second thing, and I apologize for putting this damper on today, but you may or may not be aware of the fact that suicide on college campuses, this is one of the major causes, is being so far in debt on credit cards with the inability to figure out how they can possibly get out. In addition to that, there were a number of students that were interviewed that admitted that they did tell their parents and their parents did assist them, and then they did it again. So this is why I am adamant about making sure we have a conversation about credit with our students. The next myth is my minimum payments will soon pay off my debt. Well, you are familiar with the fact that that is not going to keep that going. You are going to continue to be just a little bit of ahead. Now, what the Credit Card Act did do was, for the first time, and if you've looked at a credit card statement recently, you'll see there are 2 lines on your credit card statement. One says, if you continue paying at your minimum payment rate, this is how long it will take you, and this is how much you'll actually end up paying in the long run. And then, depending on the credit card company and whatever system they've used, there's a second line that says, however, if you pay this much more than the minimum payment, it will take you these many years and you'll only pay this much. Before 2010, there was no idea that such a thing, that you could figure that out on your own. So now you can take a look at that and go, oh, well, wait a minute, I'm going to add much more to that minimum payment than even they're suggesting because I want to move this through. So again, helping your students recognize that just paying the minimum payment is not really the best way to go. Another myth is I'll only use it for emergencies. We've had that conversation already, so I won't belabor it. But again, so often what happens, even in our adult world, we really do have that credit card just so we can hop on a plane and make sure we can see mom and dad or kiddos or grandkiddos. And then we use it for something else. And when that emergency really happens, we don't have any credit. We don't have the opportunity. But it's a really low interest rate. Well, again, make sure that you absolutely can pay that minimum payment. And all of that moving around, oftentimes the introductory rate is to get you connected. And then after that 3 months, it suddenly goes up. So be sure you're reading the fine print, and your students are as well. I know that I'll always be able to pay off the entire balance each month. Well, again, credit card companies prefer that you not, and so they reward anyone who does by upping your credit limit. This is oftentimes where people who have been very, very responsible users up until that moment, they lose control because now that $3,000 limit, which was just dandy, moves up to $5,000, and all of a sudden, ooh. Here's the interesting thing about credit card companies. You can contact them and ask them over and over again to lower your credit card limit, it's almost impossible to get them to do that. Why? Because they've got an agenda. Number 6, to improve credit, get rid of debt and cut up your cards. Now, this was our theory many years ago. We said, absolutely, once you've paid off that credit card, close that account. We do not say that anymore because your credit score, part of your credit score is based on your debt ratio. So if you had a $3,000 limit card and you paid it off, you want to keep that open because now you have access to $3,000. Once you close it, you have access to nothing, and it does count in your credit score. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So now we say, just put those credit cards in your freezer in a glass of water. So it's just really hard for them to be used in a moment because you have to thaw them out. Never use a credit card, always use cash. We have talked about that. That is a great philosophy, but it doesn't help in the long run if you're going to make a big purchase. So be careful of that. And you want to make sure that, and Vicki, talk to me for a minute, if you will, if you don't mind, about Dave Ramsey and what you're speaking of, what he disagrees with. May I put you on the spot, or you can pop it in the chat box? Because I know that Dave and I do not always agree. If you want to pop that in the chat box, that would be great. Number 8, it's okay to charge it. If you can't afford it, just pay the minimum. We know that that is not actually the way that we want to go. We want to make sure that we are able to afford it and we can pay it off.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Great, Vicki. So share with us, please.
Well, he is totally against the credit cards, and I agree with you in both of what you're saying, but what he says is that number 6 is to cut up your cards and actually cancel it because people have basically no willpower. And he says that you don't need a credit score because that's a debt score.
And you know, I absolutely see his perspective. As you know, I'm a recovering banker. So I'm coming from the standpoint that if you want a loan from me, I'm going to use a credit score. Because
I agree with you. It's
that's just the way it is. And so I appreciate you bringing that up because I do think it's very important. My philosophy about, this is my personal opinion. People have asked me how I feel about Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman. This is really my true opinion. If those two individuals can get you talking and thinking about money, I love them, even if I don't agree with them, because the conversation is what I want to have happen. So people are very, very fond of Dave Ramsey, and my comment there is great. And people love Susie Orman, and my comment is great. I don't share some of their perspectives because we're all human, but I appreciate you bringing that up, Vicki, because I think it's important to have the conversation about how other people view things. And he's an adamant against credit.
Yeah, I actually, in my course, I'm teaching Introduction to Business. The last week I talk about personal finance, and I actually talk about Dave Ramsey and what they think about him. And by presenting his ideas and also the 50-20-10. Oh, good. Yeah. And, I think that, again, that you're starting the conversation. Kudos to you, because that's how I love that people will talk about Dave Ramsey and that people will read him. And it's just so great people are talking about it. So thank you for putting that in your class. I appreciate that. That's great. All right. So these are some myths that we hope that we can bust a little bit, because they are often what is in people's minds about credit. And thanks, Angel. Yeah, Robert says that is the way to become rich. Yeah, there are a lot of different opinions out there, so find the one that works. Well, let's talk about credit worthiness. So I'm going to ask you to one more time play with me on Mentimeter. Oh, sorry, I forgot number 9. It's okay if you are late making a payment if you paid more than minimum the previous month.
I'm so glad that that showed up, because here is what we sometimes think. We say to ourselves, well, I got a little windfall this month, so I'm going to pay more than the minimum. And then the next month comes and you think, oh, well, I already paid, I paid double last time, so it's okay. The credit card company doesn't believe that. They say you owe this much today. So they're still looking for that payment every month. And just because you paid more in February doesn't mean you can get to skip March. So again, sometimes our perspective is a little bit skewed with that. They're looking for a payment every month, regardless of what you paid the month before. So let's do a little bit of what constitutes credit worthiness. So we're going to use the same www.menti.com, and we're going to use that same code. Melody, if you'd pop that in, if you'd pop that code in one more time, 62415469. And let's see what we get this time around. So if you only can think of one C, pop it in. If you can think of all five, pop them in. But we're asking, what are the 5 C's of credit? This is what lenders use in order to make a determination about how much credit to extend to you. So what do you think they look at? Credit length, credit score, credit type. Keep them coming. Debt to income ratio, property owned, married versus single. Great comments. Appreciate you playing. I do like the crazy one. I don't know if that means you're crazy or they're crazy, but I like it. Loans. All right. Thank you. We'll stop and we'll take a look at that credit worthiness. So remember, I'm speaking from the standpoint of a financial institution. So these are the 5 C's. The first is character. Have you used credit before? Have you been able to pay your previous bills on time? Your capital. What's your income? What do you own of value that could be used to repay a loan? Capacity. Do you have a job or other sources, other types, sources of income with which to make payments? Do you have other debts that you'll need to manage along with this new credit? Now, let me stop there with those 3 C's. Some lenders put more weight on these 3 C's than the other 2. So keep that in mind. A 4th C is your credit history. So qualifying for different types of credit hinges largely on your credit history, the track record that you've established while managing credit and making payments over time. Then if you are going for a secured loan, the item that secures the loan is your collateral. So if you're buying a car and you're asking for to finance that, then that car is the collateral and can be repossessed and taken away from you if you don't make your payments. The same with your mortgage. The lender owns that house before you ever get a chance to. And so in the event that you're unable to make your mortgage payments, then they foreclose and the house goes back to the bank. There are, of course, some loans that are unsecured, and so they do not look at collateral for that. And that may be a personal loan. So any questions about the 5 C's of credit worthiness? Again, lenders are going to probably weight the first 3 more than the other 2, but that isn't a guarantee. Well, then let's move on to find out what we know about credit scores and what happens with your credit report. So what's in a credit report? Well, we know from the credit IQ, that there are 3 credit reporting agencies and they do things slightly differently. And in addition to this information, it's all personal financial information, including your social security number and your date of birth. So it's your personal information, your account information, collection accounts, public records, and inquiries. So who reports to whom? When we're talking about FICO, which again is the most universally used credit score, and then we're talking right now about FICO. So the credit reporting agencies, of which there are 3, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, report and share information back and forth with FICO and the lenders. And you can see this little circle going forth. And so that's what we're looking at, is the fact that these three agencies report differently and sometimes report inaccurately. So one of the things I want you to be thinking about is taking a look at your credit report, which we'll take more time with in just a moment. So how long does derogatory information stay? Well, your students really need to know this. Unpaid student loans, that information stays forever. There's no statute of limitations on that. If you declare bankruptcy, that shows up on your credit history for 10 years. This is my favorite because I think it's a fascinating 7 years and 180 days. Not sure who came up with that, but if you have any collections against you, your late payments, 7 years, repossessions, 7 years, and inquiries for 2 years. So here's the question. Do you know what your current FICO score is? Do you know what information is used to calculate your FICO score? Do you know what you can do now to raise your FICO score? And do you know who looks at your FICO score? So kudos to those of you who answered yes, absolutely, to all of those questions. For those of us who possibly answered one or two of them, not bad. And if there were some of us who couldn't answer any of the questions, it's your lucky day, because we're going to soon be able to answer all of these questions. So let's start, though, at the very beginning, which is, what's a credit score? So I'm talking about FICO, and I will talk about Karma Credit in just a moment. But here's what a credit score is. It's a number. It's a number based on a snapshot of your credit report that identifies your credit risk. Again, most widely used credit scores are FICO scores created by Fair Isaac Company. FICO uses the information provided by the credit reporting agencies. Those would be Experian, TransUnion, and Experian. Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And your FICO score evaluates five main categories, and each category has a level of importance. So again, not all lenders use the FICO score. So let me share with you that any lender can create his or her own scoring methodology. So if you are a small community bank, you may not choose to pay FICO, and it is a paid experience. You may not be able to use that. So that's the thing that you want to be able to do, is make certain that you know where that credit score is coming from. And let's talk about the fave rave of a lot of millennials, a lot of students, is Credit Karma. Credit Karma, interestingly enough, uses what we call the Vantage Score 3.0. And it was actually developed by the credit reporting agencies as an alternative to FICO. Well, it's a great baseline. And so because it's free, I say to students, absolutely, check it out. Use your Credit Karma score to sort of pay attention. Now, you know, you can get your score free, but you're getting a lot of commercials, which is okay. So students can absolutely get on Credit Karma and get a sense of where they're at. But no one should go into a lending institution and say, but wait a minute, my Credit Karma score said I was at 690 and you're saying I'm at 633. Well, it's very possible that will happen. So use it as a baseline, but don't absolutely believe that that's going to be what your bank is using. So it's a good idea of what your FICO score, but not absolutely. So use some caution with that. So what counts in your FICO score? Well, on-time payments, 35% of your FICO score is calculated based on on-time payments. So yes, one late payment can impact Couple? Absolutely. 4 or 5? Yee, that's a downward spiral. 30% of your credit score in FICO is the capacity used. So that means that, again, if I have 2 credit cards that are maxed out at $3,000 each, and that's all I've got, then when I'm seeking additional credit, there's a red flag because apparently I can't manage my credit. If I've got 2 credit cards for $3,000 max, and one of them is open, scot-free, no balance, and the other one, maybe I've got 500 on it, suddenly my capacity used is smaller and I have more capacity, and so I'm in a better place. The length of history, not much you can do about that, but that's one of the reasons why we encourage students to be responsible users of credit and start early, because that's what's going to people are going to pay attention to. How long have you had your credit history? New credit, those are your new credit inquiries, 10%, and the types of credit, 10%. FICO does like diversification, so they're interested in seeing somebody who's got maybe a car loan and a mortgage loan or a personal loan. But that's what we're looking at. So look again at this diagram and recognize that 63% of your credit score through FICO is within your control. You can't do anything about your history. You can't really do anything about somebody, about an inquiry. And these, I should step back. Soft inquiries, those are from credit card companies soliciting you. That's not what's dinging you. What's dinging you is you seeking credit, but it's only 10%. And then the 10% of types of credit. So let me stop here and make sure that we're all on the same page. Any questions about the FICO score and what makes up that FICO score? Perfect. So let's talk about something that we really sort of think, I don't need to do this, so why are we talking about it? I haven't done it. And here's the deal. What can you do? What's credit maintenance? Well, first of all, I want you to be sure that you understand that no one can repair your credit except you. So when I look at, and in the banking industry, when I was hiring, yes, we did do credit checks. Why? Because there is a tendency to correlate, just like the crazy thing with driving and insurance, that if someone does not have a positive credit history, then maybe they're in the banking arena for a different reason than you might think, the opportunity to embezzle or whatever. So you can go along with that or not. But the fact is that when I would have somebody who would say to me, oh, I know I've got horrible credit, but I just paid someone $5,000 to fix that, I would say, oh, wow. Okay, you could have taken the $5,000 you paid to whomever, and put it towards your bills and upped your credit rating. So please encourage, there really is no one who can fix a credit better than you yourself. How do you do that? Well, you pay your bills on time. And you notify the creditor if you cannot meet the payments. So many people, and especially during the pandemic, and I absolutely understand it, and I have huge compassion and empathy, but by putting your head in the sand and not calling your creditors, that creates an adversarial relationship. So many of the people that I have the opportunity to have in my life, they said, what's going to happen to my house? And I said, please call the mortgage company, talk to them. And they were shocked when they were given a 3-month forbearance. So please help people understand that the communication is critical. But if you just stop taking the calls, or if you never contact them, yes, then they're going to stalk you. It's easier said than done, but borrow only what you can afford to repay. And make sure you absolutely understand each credit contract that you have. Does paying off a vehicle lower your credit score? It will initially, but then it will bump right up because now you've got more capacity. So that's the thing that people sometimes say, gosh, I just paid something off in my score. Your credit score is really only calculated every month. So you can pay off your car, on the 30th of July and look at your credit score on the 31st. It's going to be the same. Give it a month, and then I think you'll notice that your credit score has gone up, assuming that was everything else makes sense, that you paid all your other bills on time. So there's a little bit of a dip, and then it comes right back up. Promptly report missing credit cards and notify the creditor if a statement is incorrect or not received. And then we'll talk more about this when we talk about fraud, but you never, hate that word, but it's true. A bank will never call you up and ask you to confirm your credit card number. A credit card company will never ask anyone to do the same thing. They know your information. So the fact of the matter is that unless you're making the call and you know who you're calling, never give out any information whatsoever. So one of the things that I want you to do is absolutely check your credit. Now, listen carefully to these instructions because it can be a little wonky. I'm going to encourage you to go to this particular site that's listed on the screen, Annual Credit Report, that would be singular.com. The reason that I said that is because if you go and you type in annual credit reports, plural, you will be asked to pay for your credit report. By law, you are entitled to a credit report, one per credit reporting agency every 12 months. So when you go to this particular site, you will have a choice. Which of the credit reporting agencies would you like to have the report come from? Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. For purposes of checking for credit fraud or identity theft, you will want to make a tickler system for yourself. So I do it with the holidays. I say to myself, so Thanksgiving is coming up, and I'm so thankful that I have some money management skills. I'm going to check my credit report from Equifax before the holidays. It's the only one I'm getting. Then it's Valentine's Day, and I want to be good to myself. I want to be my own Valentine. And so I'm going to get my TransUnion credit report on Valentine's Day so I can double check that there were not some squirrely things happening over the holidays with my credit. And then, because I want to be independently wealthy one day, on July 4th, I'm going to get my Experian credit report. And I'm going to do this every 12 months, not calendar year, 12 months. And each one of those is free, and you should never, 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 never pay for those credit reports. Well, let's move into good debt, because there is such a thing. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad knows that, the author of that. So yes, you run a financial risk when you borrow money, no question about it. But with good debt, your financial risk is low and your opportunity and chances of making money are high. So good debt is loosely defined as debt that brings some form of long-term benefit to the consumer. So good debt is purchasing an asset that will appreciate or increase in value. And so, yes, we have two examples of this, because any post-secondary education, we know that we are in a world today that we need to be lifelong learners. So the more I can continue my education after high school, the better chances I have of increasing my marketability and getting a higher salary. But of course, I have to complete that education. And therein lies sort of the double whammy with student loans, et cetera. Completing your education is good debt. For many individuals, having a house that increases in value is a good debt because it makes you money. And yes, we can tell each other stories. I have my own where that didn't happen, and that either you're underwater or you sold the house for less than you paid for it, but for most individuals, a house will be that good debt. So that opportunity to invest in yourself with education, or perhaps to invest in your family. Good debt. We need to make sure that we understand there is such a thing. Yep, there is bad debt. We talked a little bit about this before, but when you borrow for things that immediately go down in value or will likely go down in value, that's when we're in trouble. So who doesn't want a new car? Everybody should have one, right? But maybe that gently used car is a better investment than the fact that it's going to depreciate in the minute you walk off the lot or drive off the lot. I love to travel, but I have to admit that I've got to be able to actually pay for that than just keep racking up the credit cards. And there's that delicious looking hamburger. So, obviously, if you charge these items and you're not able to pay them off in a month, then you're accruing interest. You're paying more than they were worth in the beginning. And that's one of the things that we consider to be bad debt. Well, what is debt distress? And some of us may have experienced this. And we don't always understand debt distress because it's not a daily occurrence. And they seem sort of harmless and it's just one time kind of thing. But let's take a look at them. So if we find ourselves using our credit card cash advances to pay for living expenses, it's a little bit of a danger zone. If we're using the overdraft protection plan on our checking account to pay monthly bills, we need to think about that. Maybe we're using our savings to pay bills. Now, I'm not talking about your emergency fund to make a purchase. I'm talking about your everyday monthly bills that now we're using savings for. Using one credit card to pay off another. There are some additional signs of debt distress. Accessing payday loans. And I'm one of those. I'm going to come clean. I did it. It wasn't a payday loan. Well, it was, but it had a much sexier title. It was a direct deposit advance. Don't you love that? Didn't make me feel so sort of smarmy. I got a direct deposit advance. And I will be the first to tell you, I paid for that. It took me 6 months to get out from under that piece. Being over the limit on one or more lines of credit. And this is the piece that's so tragic, is having to delay medical or dental visits, our own personal health, because we simply don't have that opportunity. So that's one of the things that I want you to be thinking about as some sort of cues sometimes that you might be able to hear from your students, not with a lot of prying and not with judgment, but maybe something that says, wow, let me see if I can have a conversation with this student. Well, how am I going to manage my debt? Interestingly, it starts with assessing your debt situation. So some of us like to just put those bills in a drawer and we'll get to them one day because we just don't want to face it. And I appreciate that. Been there myself. But if we can assess the situation, then we can set priorities for getting out of debt. Then we can calculate the repayment options that are going to get us out of debt. And we can identify ways to avoid or correct debt problems. And yes, I am absolutely the first person to say this is a lot easier said than done, because many of us are probably a little comfortable in having our heads in the sand. And so we really don't want to know. And if we don't really know how much debt we're in, then it won't be quite so painful. But wouldn't you rather get control over your debt? So this is nothing rocket science about this little spreadsheet. It just says, I'm going to write it down. I'm going to take control. I'm going to face up. So I'm going to get my balance. Then I'm going to look at the monthly payment. I'm going to look at the due date. I'm going to do the amount paid and the debt date paid. And I'm going to finally get control of that piece. So some of you may be familiar with this, and I want to make sure you understand we're not talking smoke and mirrors. Some of you may call this the power payment. Some of you may know it as the avalanche. Some of you may know it as the snowball. It's got all sorts of fancy names. But this is a real, true life way to get out of debt. Now I feel a little bit like I'm speaking like Susie Orman, so pardon for that. But here's the reality. Let's say that you have a student, a family friend, with 3 credit cards, and they want to get out of debt. And they have been meticulously paying a little bit more on each credit card than the minimum payment. That will go on for years, ladies and gentlemen, years. How can they do it? Here's how they can do it. There are various schools of thought. One is that, again, we're a microwavable society, as someone pointed out yesterday. So let's go for immediate gratification. Let's take the credit card bill that is lowest, and let's make that the first one we're talking about. Somebody else will say, well, I don't think that's very smart. Let's take the credit card that has the highest interest. It doesn't matter. Just pick one. Find a system that makes you feel good and go with it. But here's the simplest math I can do for you. Credit card A, $500 balance. Credit card B, $1,500. Credit card C, $3,000. I like immediate gratification. I'm going to pay off the $500 one first. I stop paying them over the minimum on credit cards B and C. I continue paying the minimum on those two, but that's all I pay. I look at my credit card A, which is $500, and let's just say that my minimum payment is $35. I add to that minimum payment whatever I can do every single month, and let's just say that it's $20. I'm paying $55 every month on that $500 credit card. I'm paying my minimum payment on my $1,500 balance and my $3,000 balance. Chug, chug, chug along. Bada bing, my $500 credit card is paid off. Move that aside. I take my $55 payment that I was making on that credit card. I add it to my credit card B. So my credit card B was $1,500, and let's say that minimum payment was $50. I've got $50 for minimum. I add my $55, I'm paying $105 every single month on credit card B. Credit card A is done. I'm still paying the minimum payment on credit card C. But can you begin to see in your own imagination, credit card B is chugging along at a faster rate getting paid off. So I remember I was paying $105 for credit card B. That one's paid off. Still have a balance on credit card C. And let's say that credit card payment was $75. I add the $105 to the $75. And now I'm paying $190, if I did the math right, to that credit card. That's how we get out of debt, ladies and gentlemen. Look it up, check it out, share it with your students. It's not smoke and mirrors. It's not a get-rich scheme. But paying a little bit more on every credit card, you'll never get there. And what you can do is you can look out and see the future. I worked with used to teach, provide educators in Colorado once a year, fiscal fitness training. And I had an educator come to me after a credit conversation. We hadn't talked about this. And she said, I'm overwhelmed. My husband and I haven't slept for 3 years. And I said, wow. And she said, I should know better. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I said, can I share this with you? And I did. She came back the next morning, found me and said, you changed my life. And I said, well, I'm sure I didn't, but thank you. She said, no. She said, my husband and I stayed up last night. We figured it out. We have 3 years. In 3 years, we'll be out of debt. Do you have any idea? I mean, she said, I slept for the first night in years. So it works. So it's a fun thing to talk about, but look it up. It'll all make sense. Let's finish up. I know our time is short. So let's see what a few more things we need to talk about, because we want to be realistic about the fact that some of us may need to file for bankruptcy. This isn't a value judgment. It's just wanting to be certain that when you make that decision, you make an informed and educated decision, because the consequences of declaring bankruptcy are severe. It does stay on your credit report for 10 years. It doesn't forgive all debts. We know it doesn't forgive student loans. It's part of a public record. And yeah, it can make it challenging to get a new credit card or a loan. But again, no judgment here. There are many individuals who need, because of experiences outside of their control. A lot of people have medical expenses that they'll never see the light of day, and they declare bankruptcy. In the state of Colorado, not sure what it is in California, but about 5 years ago, more stringent rules for actually declaring bankruptcy. So it is more difficult in some states to declare bankruptcy than it used to be. And the point is, if this is an option and this is you do it as an educated, informed consumer, by all means, this is one of those alternatives. Well, let's recap. If used correctly, the advantages of credit outweigh the disadvantages. Lenders take into consideration the 5 C's when they decide to lend you money. Good debt is purchasing an asset that will increase in value, and bad debt is purchasing an asset that will lose value. A good credit history and high credit score equals financial flexibility. So what's your challenge? Well, here's your challenge. If you have some concerns about your credit history, then you might identify at least one new strategy to employ to make a positive impact on your credit rating. Absolutely, please, if you've never pulled a credit report, today's the day to do it. And if you haven't for a while, today's the day to do it. Remember, 3 individual credit reports per 12 months. Don't ask for all 3 credit reports today, because when we talk next week about identity theft, you'll be sad that you did that. So just pick one. That creates a tickler system to access your credit reports. And not a bad time to do a little self-reflection. Are you headed for debt distress? Many of us experienced it during the pandemic, and some of us are getting out of it in a better fashion than others, but it's time to check that out. We have our last session next week, and it's on financial products and fraud. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that tax piece. So we've just got a few more minutes. I want to make certain that there are not burning questions or issues. And I meant to share with you that please feel free to reach out to Lisa or Melody if something pops up into your head. Because our last session is next week, feel free to shoot them an email that says, hey, is CJ going to talk about this, or can we have a conversation about that? Because I absolutely want you to feel that you're getting your value for today and for the other sessions. Questions, comments, always open to seeing your comments in the chat box and to answer anything that you might have. We covered a lot of territory today.